Hello, I'm Kimberly Miller with University Television Production. Today is September 13, 2013. I am thrilled to be here today with the well-accomplished Dr. Rick Moore. He's an associate professor and chair of the communication department since 2005, and he's taught at BSU since 1994. He is head of the Religion and Media Interest Group as part of the Association for Education and Journalism in Mass Communication. He was nominated for the Golden Apple Award from ASBSU. Dr. Moore taught communication courses abroad in France and in Spain. He has been interviewed by national news networks as well as internationally, such as the Australian Broadcast Corporation. Dr. Moore has been published in 10 different academic journals, and he's received his PhD at the University of Oregon. Now, Dr. Moore, I know you're a Duck at heart, but have you accepted the Bronco Nation?
Well, last time I saw the Ducks and the Broncos together, it was at Bronco Stadium, and obviously most people know who won that game. So generally, if those two teams are playing, I root for the Broncos, but if the Ducks are playing anybody else, Huskies namely, I always root for the Ducks.
Oh, okay, I guess that's acceptable. So you're chair of the communication department. What exactly does that even mean?
It means too many things to even name. It's some of my colleagues a while back asked if I would put together a list of the things that chairs do, and it's inexhaustible. Just lots of things related to students, to faculty, to external constituencies in the community, as well as other parts of the administration, dean, provost, etc. Mainly, the chair is someone who oversees the administration of the department. And one thing people should know is that it varies from university to university and even a little bit within departments at Boise State. But some universities see chairs as pure administrators, and they bring in people to serve as chair. Most departments at Boise State look at that task a little differently, and they see it as simply a faculty member who for some time serves certain needs in the department, and then that person might go back to just being a regular faculty member after serving as chair for a while. And our department tends to see the chair role more that way, and so mainly I do things that need to be done that one person in the department can do more efficiently than everyone in the department, such as determining how to schedule classes in terms of what we offer, when we offer it, where we offer it, those kinds of things. But also many other administrative tasks such as budgeting the department. But big budget issues we decide democratically at the department level. I deal with the day-to-day operations. This is a good example of the fact that I'm not that powerful given my role as chair.
Okay, so as for budget, is it just you solely, or does everyone in the faculty have a say, or?
It depends on the category. We have some decisions we need to make that are just day-to-day, and I've generally told my colleagues that for those day-to-day decisions, if they're not big decisions, I'll make them, because it's, again, silly to contact all the faculty and say, the copier is broken, do we want to pay to have someone come repair it? But if we're making a decision as to moving money from one aspect of our budget to another, say, for example, our capital budget, in saying, well, we want to use some money from our capital budget and we want to permanently transfer it over, so from now on it's used for student scholarships or something of that sort, which you also have to realize there are certain things we can and cannot do. But if we wanted to do something like that and it was feasible and the administration would allow it, I wouldn't make that decision without the faculty, because it's a long-term consequence, not a short one.
Okay, with the roles, all the roles you have as being chair, what do you enjoy about it?
Not much.
Not much.
No, I'm joking with that. It's a good opportunity to learn. Now, the learning curve is such that I think I'm over the top of the learning curve, but for the first number of years, there were a lot of things that the average faculty member at the university doesn't understand how they work. And when you're thrust into the role of being a chair, you have to learn how those things work, and you have to be knowledgeable as to the machinations, so to speak, of the university. And that's a good thing in many ways, to get some sense of what's going on behind the scenes in regards to things that we take for granted that happen day to day. In addition to that, I think most people could benefit from sitting in the role of chair just to understand a little bit more how each of us deals with conflicts, how each of us deals with difficult decisions, how each of us deals with the pressures that come from many directions in a position like that, because many deans and provosts admit that the chair is one of the toughest jobs at the university, because you have a large number of faculty underneath telling you what they'd like to do, and then again a dean and then a provost and the president of the university up above telling you what they'd like to do, and you're kind of stuck in the middle. And that's not a pleasant thing necessarily, but on the other hand, it's for many people kind of a growing experience to say, well, how am I going to handle this and how am I going to deal with it day to day, and learning how to make decisions when it's possible to put off decisions, which are skills that in your day-to-day role as a regular faculty member you might not deal with that much at that level.
Sounds like good pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you taught abroad in France and in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Well, my teaching abroad is through a program that Boise State is part of called the University Studies Abroad Coalition. And so most of the students that I deal with are American students who go abroad for a while and want a cross-cultural experience, learning something that they might have studied in their normal environment at home, but in a new environment. So in my case, studying, for example, mass media in Spain. How are the mass media similar? How are they different from American media? How, for example, is the Spanish film industry structured differently than ours? How is the culture of something like cinema different than in a different culture than ours? We tend to think that American film is the only way of thinking about film, but in some European countries, for example, it's changing, and I think things are getting more homogenous across the world, and in film industries are getting more and more similar across the world. But historically, for example, in places like Spain and France, many people thought of film as more of an art form than in the United States. For the most part, in the United States historically, a large part of our film industry was really operated, maintained, in some ways led by people who really saw it purely as a business interest, and the people that made the decisions in our industry really wanted to reinforce that idea that it's a business, it's a business. One of the old executive producers from years ago used to say, if you want to send a message, call Western Union. So if that's what you want to do is send a message, that's where you do that. We want to make a film, and the film is supposed to make money. And in Europe, for example, in Spain and France, there's a large part of the film community historically that's always thought that this is an artistic form, and it's a way of self-expression, it's a way of negotiating ideas with the audience and with the culture, and that's a very different thing for American students to be able to experience, and I think it's best for them to experience it in that context, because in addition to talking about the films themselves, you can talk about the culture, you can talk about the history, you can talk about the language, and they're going to be much more easily exposed to it. Now, some of this is changing because in two ways. One is I think students have much more exposure to those things if they wish to today than they used to. We all know that students who study languages today, for example, can, even if they live in the smallest, most remote community in the United States, can be exposed to almost any language they wish if they'll simply get online, if they have the capacity to do so, which what most Americans do, get online and find a website where they can hear people speaking in French from France. And that didn't used to be possible. So learning some of those things is a little easier today in situ, in your place where you are, than it used to be, where it was really beneficial to go to Spain or to France. But I think that hasn't changed completely. The other thing I mentioned a moment ago is generally I think most people talk about globalization as the fact that cultures across the world, especially in advanced capitalist, modernized countries, are getting more and more similar. And I perceive that is the case. I've been to Europe a number of times, and each time I go to Europe, I say one of two things or both are happening. Either Western Europe is getting more like America, or America is getting more like Western Europe, or both are happening. But a lot of what used to make a trip to Spain extremely distinct from being in the United States is no longer there. There's less of it anyway.
So, teaching in France and teaching in Spain, how does it compare to teaching here at Boise State?
Well, the USAC program is a little different because for the most part you're teaching American students, and you're teaching them kind of in an American structured system. There's a lot of interaction with students from the other universities, and you're placed in a university in the other country. You might have a lot of interaction with regular faculty from that university, but for the most part the students are American students, and that makes it a very similar experience. Generally, I would say there may be some of the better students. There are students who either which direction the causality here is someone else could explain, but whether it's because they take languages, foreign languages, and want to study abroad because they are already smart, or because they take languages and study abroad, they become smarter and more intelligent and better students. But my experience generally is the ones who do the USAC program tend to be, top-notch students in general. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there was probably no need to really pick up on learning the languages there, or
the students all have to have had some language, and once they're there, they're immersed in the language within the culture. Many stay in a family home. If they live on campus, they're dealing with the campus community. The cafeteria is a place where they speak the native language, and you really need to learn some of it. Most of them learn a lot while they're there in that immersion situation, but it varies how much they've had and how much they do learn. Part of it's a devotion. If you go to another country, and and all of us know this because we've seen it from this side, if you go to another country and there are other people from your country in that location and you only hang out with them, you're probably not going to learn much in the way of language. But those that say, no, I'm here to learn French, or I'm here to learn Spanish, can do so. And then they will also take, while they're there, the American students in the USAC programs while they're there will take classes from native professors from that university as well in addition. So that's a good opportunity to learn. But again, I said a moment ago, my perception is today language learning for most people is how much you want to try, how much effort you want to put into it. And certainly human beings, my perception is generally tend to be lazy, and a lot of young people realize that the handwriting's on the wall. In the future, most of us will be able to use technology to get through binds with language difficulties because we already have digital translators, and those are getting more powerful. So those that say, I don't want to learn a language because I don't think have to, might be right in terms of that technological proficiency. I'm kind of rambling here, but I think they're missing the boat in terms of cultural engagement and understanding that learning a language down deep inside and learning how a language thinks about things allows a student to broaden their concept of the world. And so learning the French language, to me, isn't just instrumental for knowing how to order coffee, it's also a way of seeing how the French think about the world differently than us. And so I think students that think that way say, maybe I do want to learn the language, even though I don't have to. And I think many take advantage of that.
Just thinking in a broader concept. Mm-hmm. Since you've been chair here at Boise State, how do you feel that the department has grown?
No question that we've grown in terms of the number of students we serve, especially at the undergraduate level. Most years our number of majors has increased pretty significantly. We are one of the largest departments on campus in terms of our number of majors. We've also added a number of faculty. I think most of us would say we haven't added as many faculty as we would like to, but as most people understand, a good part of that is budget, and anyone who's studied the numbers knows that the State Board of Education and the Idaho State Legislature have not allowed the budget of that comes from the state to maintain a balance with the number of increasing students at the university as a whole. So, we don't have as much money to hire faculty as we'd like, but in spite of that, since I became chair, we've added several new faculty tenure track lines, which is maybe a way of describing faculty that the average person on the street doesn't understand, but those are full-time people who teach, do service, and do research. We've also added some lecturer lines, and lecturers are people who have expertise in their field, typically have at least a master's degree, and they just teach classes. They're not required to do service and research. We've added additional lecturer lines to our department since I became chair also. So we are slowly but surely increasing our number of faculty, not as fast as we like, but that's another sign of growth. We've also added some curricular areas to the department. Since I became chair, we added the public relations certificate, which was not in place when I was chair. In fact, we've really beefed up the public relations program significantly. When I became chair, we had one public relations class, and now we have basically enough classes that if we wanted to, we could change that from a certificate to a regular Bachelor of Arts degree. And then we also added a cinema studies certificate. Much of that was classes that were already on the books, but some are new as well.
So why hasn't it been changed, the PR certificate, to the bachelor's degree?
That's an interesting issue in regards to, I think there are internal issues to the university and there are external issues outside of the university. It's redundant, but at the internal level, the question is that something the department wants to commit to, making that a complete freestanding department degree rather than a certificate. And I think in general the faculty are attuned to that and interested in doing that, and we'll see in the very near future that might happen. But at an external level, do realize if we want to do that, the university doesn't have the power to do so on its own. At a certain point, what we would need to do is to go through our dean and then the provost and the president of the university and get their approval to do so. Also at the university level, there's a university curriculum committee that would have to approve that request to make that into a degree. The bigger issue is then we would have to go to the State Board of Education, because anytime you add a degree to a university, that's their purview to determine whether it's acceptable or not. And my sense is the State Board of Education would probably be amenable to that. I think there's a lot of demand for it. In fact, if we went to the State Board of Education and asked them for the permission to change the PR certificate into a degree, we would need to marshal some data to demonstrate the need. And I think if we went out in the community and asked professionals if they think that could be a useful degree for our students to have when going into the workplace, I think they would say yes. But do realize there's one other issue, is there are other universities in the state that are somewhat territorial about what they offer and what we offer, and some of them might think that it would be inappropriate for us to offer that degree because they've offered it for a while. And that's something a lot of people don't understand, that universities within a state sometimes compete for what they think is their territory, so to speak. And that could be an issue also. Any and all of the above. So it's a lot more complicated than most people think. I couldn't wake up tomorrow and say, let's just change that from a certificate to a degree.
Press a button
and I don't know if I want that power, but I certainly don't have it.
Okay. So I see the progression from when you weren't chair to now being chair. Where do you see the future going with the comm department?
Those are big issues and big decisions that, as I said earlier, are beyond my power, or at least beyond my perceived power as chair, because as I mentioned a moment ago, the Department of Communication has historically seen the chair as a servant, so to speak, who does certain things for the department, and in fact there are very often things that no one else wants to do. No one wants to mess with the scheduling. No one else wants to mess with the budget. They want to teach their classes and do their research. But something like that is so big, and the consequences of decisions as to where we want to go are so big for them and their lives and how it will affect their teaching and their research, that given that, those are democratic decisions that the department as a whole has to decide. The university is, like most universities, increasingly expecting the department to wrestle with those and come up with what you might call mission statements and or strategic plans. And the department is engaged in some discussion of strategic planning right now. And as that works out, I will have a better sense of where my colleagues want to go and where they want us to be in the not too distant future. One of the struggles that all departments of communication face around the country is the extent to which they should be offering classes that are professionally oriented, career oriented for students, and that teach a lot of the hands-on skills that students want to work in, for example, a communication industry or communication business, such as television production or film production or something of that sort. And one of the questions we always address is, to what extent should we be increasing our capacity in the department to offer those kinds of classes? But there are other pressures as well. Some people who have been reading the news know that there are many people around the country who say that's not what higher education should be doing. Higher education should be instilling more critical thinking, better writing skills, better speaking skills, better group work skills, etc. And I would not want to suggest that those two things are exclusive. The career, professional education, and the critical thinking, good writing, good speaking, etc. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but there is a tendency to see that we need to say which of those is a higher priority. And that's one of those long-term issues that departments such as ours need to wrestle with and make commitments to. You know, which of those two do we give more attention to? It's also a resource issue in terms of teaching critical thinking is less expensive than teaching film production, for example, and those are always difficult decisions. One other place where there's a balance that always needs to be struck, that's going to have to be a balance that the Department of Communication as well as the university as a whole is going to have to wrestle with for the near future, is to what extent should we be putting a lot of our priorities, a lot of our assets, a lot of our resources into undergraduate education and strengthening that, and to what extent should we be putting more of our emphasis, more of our resources, assets into graduate education. Certainly Boise State right now feels like it's in a position where graduate education is very important. Growing graduate programs is a necessity to stay competitive with other universities in the region and the country. It's just with limited resources, is it a matter of trying to find some resources from one of those and move them to the other, or is it not a zero-sum game? Is it possible to take some external resources from somewhere and develop both at the same time? And those are always issues that the department's having to struggle with, and will continue to.
Personally, how do you feel that you fit the needs of students that are in media and in journalism?
I think generally I feel like we do pretty well, but you have to understand that's looking at the long term. Someone who's been here now for quite a few years, and that is that my perception of that balance we talked about a moment ago of students have to learn to be good writers, good critical thinkers, good speakers, etc., and that you can teach those classes without any of the professional classes that we talked earlier about. I realize that's the case, that those are important, but I also realize that students want to have some rudimentary skills that they need to get into the marketplace, that students need to have certain things that if you go out and even look for an internship, for example, people expect you to have some video production, some audio production, some news writing. If you're in public relations, they expect you to have taken a few classes in public relations and maybe produce some things in those classes that you can make manifest, that you can visualize, put in front of someone. And given that, my sense is that you do have to strike a balance there. And I think the balance that we've tended to strike in the department is pretty healthy. I think we offer enough of the hands-on classes that generally students find that they can learn what they need to learn to get their foot in the door someplace. They're not going to go in and say, I'm ready to take a high-tier production job at a production facility, but they have enough to when they graduate they can say, would you look at what I have and see if I might be the kind of person that you can grow into what you want. And given that, I think in hindsight, I see the students who came here and learned some of those professional skills while really understanding that it's important to focus on the critical thinking, the writing, etc., they do really well in their careers. And they end up coming back to me later and saying, in some cases, you know, I thought when I was here, all I needed was the professional experience and the professional learning, and that's what I wanted to do. And now that I've been out for 10 years, I realize, Dr. Moore, what you told me was true, that those things are important. Those things are important to getting my career started. But what's going to matter in the long haul of my career is not whether I know how to use a particular kind of camera, because in video production, for example, because that particular kind of camera is going to disappear in 5 years. It'll no longer be around here. If you look at, do a Google search. Search for certain kinds of models of audio and video equipment and keep doing that search, and every year you're going to find you're going to get fewer hits of that product because they break down, they disappear, and something else takes its place, and sooner or later that piece of equipment is obsolete. And certain kinds of training becomes obsolete if we simply teach students to do certain things that are very limited, whereas learning to be a good team member is never going to be obsolete. No matter what we do in the future, people are going to work in teams unless you're the independent artist who does watercolor or something like that, right? And if you're working with teams, that's a skill that's going to serve you the rest of your life. Being a good critical thinker, being a good problem solver, etc. Now, I do realize students very often don't see it that way, but my sense is in the long haul they do. They do understand, you know, wow, I'm glad we really were exposed to both those aspects of higher education.
Really quickly, citizen journalism, it's where in the Middle East and also in Iran, citizens are able to report themselves on different incidents that were going on, and then a major network will pick up what they reported. How do you feel about that?
Generally, I'm optimistic about citizen journalism, and do realize if you do a Google search, you'll realize that's a term that's been around for some time, and there was actually within the traditional news culture of American mass media an idea of citizen journalism that was a little different than that, and that was an idea that traditional newspapers, traditional television stations would go into their community and try to find citizens to draw stories out of, but the traditional media were still the middleman within that conceptualization. What you're talking about is a new conceptualization, which is given the wide availability of video and audio recording devices that are in hands of so many people, and then a channel that allows you to send what you've recorded to millions, if not billions of people around the world, does that change the whole scenario? Does that change the ball game? And I say yes, it certainly does. I think the question for anybody who's an optimist or optimistic, as I said a moment ago, is twofold. One is, will the channels continue to be there and continue to be as open as they have been? So far, the indications are that they are, and that people that create something, again, are going to be able to push a button and send it, and once it reaches that network, it's going to be very difficult to keep it from spreading, and that's the message of Arab Spring, right? That it's hard to keep images from reaching the masses. It's hard to keep audio sounds from reaching the masses. It's hard to keep someone's writing about what's happening from reaching the masses. And so that particular aspect I'm still optimistic about, but my sense of human nature is I don't promise that's always going to be the case. You know, some people have some sense that human history always progresses positively. They obviously haven't studied history. Because history doesn't always move positively. People at certain points in history have thought, certainly this is the best of all possible worlds, and a couple years later found out they were in the middle of something that was atrocious, and that could happen in the future for us. So that's one thing. The other issue, I mentioned this is twofold problem. The other issue, I think, is you have to understand there's a negative side to what we just described. Yeah. And the negative side is once everyone in the world is able to shoot video, and able to record audio, able to write something and put it on the web, there's so much out there that we sometimes lose track of it, and especially we have some difficulty figuring out what of all that material is worth our attention. Yeah. And certainly we all know that a very large part of what's on the web is complete distraction, right? I was watching one of the late night television shows the other day, and I think they were joking, but they gave a statistic on what percentage of what's searched for on Google is cat videos. And it's like, people are going onto Google and searching for videos of cats, and that's what they're spending their time doing. And your point a moment ago was certainly there's this wonderful information that years ago would not have been able to reach the public, and now it's reaching the public, but are they attuned to it when there's so many other choices? It's no different than with other, if you want an analogy, in the modern world we have the ability to produce so much food. The question is, once the food is produced, do we choose the good food, the food we should be eating, or do we choose the junk food? And we certainly know, you know, from human experience, we know many of us tend to choose the junk food over and over again, and that's the issue with modern mass media and digital media, that yes, we have more, yes, there's more freedom right now. Will we make the right choices?
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today with Dr. Moore. If you have any questions regarding the communication department, you can contact him at rmoore@boisestate.edu. For UTP Presents, I'm Kimberly Miller.